to the Nevada Patriot Podcast with Matt Sadler.
Welcome to the Nevada Patriot Podcast with Matt Sadler. I'm your host, Matt Sadler. If you're joining us on 97.7 FM, 977fm.rocks, Rumble, YouTube, or the NevadaPatriot.com, welcome aboard. We're thankful that you're here. We're jumping into episode 44 with a great guest. Election day seems far away, but I assure you it's almost around the corner. This cycle and this election season is one of the most crucial in our nation's history, and that is not even hyperbole. It's massive. We Nevadans deserve transparency when we choose our officials who represent us, especially those at the national, federal level. Here on our show, we hope and we aim to provide that to you viewers and to you listeners. Our guest today is retired Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Air Force, a family man, businessman, and public speaker. He is a Republican candidate running to be your next United States Senator from Nevada. Please welcome aboard Tony Grady. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for having me here. Absolutely. I appreciate it.
I absolutely appreciate you making this a part of you got a huge campaign schedule and making time for us and our audience here. Much appreciated, Tony. So with that in mind, tell our audience a little bit about yourself and why you're running for U.S. Senate.
Well, I'm running for U.S. Senate because I want to represent Nevadans and I want to represent the whole state. You'll find out that I am a constitutional originalist, and I will stand on the firm foundation of the Constitution to protect your God-given rights of free speech, the right to bear arms, and freedom of religion. That's where I stand, and I'm going to be a statesman, and I'm going to be a statesman for all of Nevada, and that's where I stand. So you want to know why I decided to run. I would like to just go back a little bit and talk a little bit about my background because I want your listeners to know what makes me unique. I want to talk about my parents. They were both born poor, and they were born in the Jim Crow South that was controlled by leaders who were elected from the Democrat Party. Basically, one party ruled down there. But despite being in that oppressive environment, they sought education to improve themselves. So they were real strong in education. They both went to a historically black college called Hampton Institute. It's now called Hampton University. And they pursued education unyieldingly. So that is something that gives me a really big place in my heart for education. My dad was tapped by another historically black university, Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, to go to the country of Indonesia because they wanted help converting cottage industries into business. While he was over there, he was told that the United Nations had the same type of office and that he should apply to work there. So we were supposed to go to Indonesia, I found out, but due to political unrest, the family never made it. So after his year there, he came back to the States, applied to the United Nations, was hired by an organization called the ILO, or International Labor Organization, which incidentally, it might interest your readers that after the two world wars, the ILO was put into place to try to get rid of unrest and have standardized work rules across all democracies. So his area was education. While when he was hired by the United Nations, we were sent to Africa, and I got to live in Lagos, Nigeria. So I was there from 6 years old to 9 years old. While we were there, somebody told my dad that the United States government had the similar kind of office and that they thought he should apply. So after 3 years, he resigned from the United Nations. We returned to the United States. He applied to the State Department, and he was hired by an organization called the United States Agency for International Development. And what the United States Agency for International Development is the non-political side of the State Department through which our foreign aid money goes through. So it deals with agriculture, public safety, medical education information. So my father was in education. So whenever you hear about the United States giving foreign aid money to a foreign country, it goes through USAID. So that's what that organization does. USAID sent my father to Vietnam. The war was going on at the time, so our family was safe haven in Bangkok, Thailand. So from half of sixth grade through graduation high school, I lived in Bangkok, Thailand. During this time period, I saw what would happen, what happened in countries that had socialism and communism as a form of government, mainly abject poverty for their people. So I became very patriotic. That caused me to go to the United States Air Force Academy and serve as a pilot for 20 years in the Air Force. I became a test pilot, commanded the B-2 Stealth Bomber Test Squadron during its most intensive flight test period. The B-2 is the most expensive airplane that the Air Force has ever developed. And I had the privilege of commanding that organization, and I also had the privilege of flying some of the first flights, and that was great. I also served in the Pentagon, and I was the action officer that would accompany generals when they would go and speak and testify before the Senate and House Armed Services Committees. And I was the author for the bomber portion of the president's budget, and that's the portion of his military budget that was sent to Congress for approval. So I understand the appropriations process and the approval process. So we appropriate and we authorize. So those types of things for our budget, and I understand how they function, or maybe how they don't function. So from that standpoint, after the Air Force, I flew internationally for FedEx for 20 years. And then I also, concurrently while I was at FedEx, I ran a nanotechnology company for 11 years. So I understand a lot about small businesses. So what I would want your viewers to understand is that I have a unique skill set that's well honed, and I understand military strategy, I understand diplomacy, and I understand economics. And those are the things that make me uniquely qualified to serve as a U.S. Senator. And I want to serve as a senator to guard and protect the rights of Nevadans and the rest of Americans. So thank you for asking.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have a unique skill set, also unique upbringing, kind of brought into the world of diplomacy kind of by birthright, being born into that kind of lifestyle, being born into the international scene, so to speak, experiences like people like me, very sheltered. A lot of folks like us, like me, my wife, don't really have that experience. So it's kind of a unique skill set that you do bring that's hard to actually replicate or hard to compete with, because you kind of have been, and you combine that with your military experience, you've kind of already got a lot of those boxes crossed that maybe some other newer faces on the political scene might not have. So would you say, with that in mind and how that qualifies you for your background, your background, I lost my train of thought for a minute, Tony, I'm sorry, but what are some of your top focus areas, and I'll leave it open to whatever you want to talk about, focus areas once you're elected, some of your platform goals?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, but one of the things that's driving me here is that elected Democrat officials are destroying the American dream. And I have had the wonderful opportunity of living the American dream because of the God-given rights that we have and because of the values that my parents raised me with. But one of the things that's interesting about this is that I am going to take American resolve, because Americans our resolve is strongest when our backs are against the wall. I promise to take that American resolve and stop those leaders from trying to destroy the American dream. That's very important to me. So how does that translate to things that I will do? We need to fix energy first, because when energy is high, everything else is high. So because of Biden's policies, Nevadans' working families are being strangled. So we need to open up ANWR, we need to reopen the Keystone Pipeline, and we need to actually give leases to the oil companies, because it takes a while for them to actually go prove the oil and then to get it to where it's going to come to market. So energy is pretty important. Safety is next. We need to remove government officials that are hurting the country, like the current Secretary of Homeland Security needs to be removed. Maybe he needs to be thrown in jail, but he needs to be removed. And what we need is a secretary in there who's going to ensure that our laws on the books are enforced. If our laws on the books are enforced, we will immediately begin to secure our country. I just want folks to know that I was recently down in Eureka, and the sheriff down there shared with me, Jesse Watts shared with me, that because of what's happening in Texas, the result here in Nevada is that we have a steep climb of deaths that are to folks who have come into our country illegally. So we need to stop that and get security going there. That's really important. And then in foreign policy, we need to enact things that are going to put the United States back in the proper place on the world stage. Because when we do the right things in the United States, the rest of the world does a lot better. Right now, we're not doing very well with the war raging in Ukraine. 150,000 already that are deceased. They should be alive today, and they're not. So I would say that those are some important things. But then my background as a businessman doing a startup, and I rode the ups and downs of trying to create advanced medical devices and all that goes on with that. I understand that regulations hamper small businesses, and small businesses employ more Americans than anything else. So I would want to enact legislation that gets rid of more regulation and rein in the bureaucrats. So in summary, I would like your folks to know that I understand foreign policy, what's important about diplomacy. I understand military strategy, and I understand what we need to do business-wise to get our country going in a positive direction instead of the decline that it's on now.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate that, because like you touched on, when America takes front and center and we are the leaders in the different avenues on the world stage, I think the world is better off.
It is.
And I think with better leadership, whether it be in the Senate, the U.S. House of Representatives, and especially in the White House, I don't know that our problems, Ukraine, Russia, would kind of be where they're at if we had better leaders. So,
I would agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction, and it's why it's so important for you voters out there, you listeners, to really rally behind good, solid, conservative, constitutional candidates that understand the scope and the role of government. Because I think you'd agree with me that our founding fathers and really in the last couple hundred years would be kind of turning over in their graves to see what we've made of the bureaucracy that is now consuming and just growing like this huge,
right,
like the blob, right?
And Matt, if I could say, I would like your viewers to go to GradyForNevada.com, and that's my last name, Grady, and then FOR written out, and then Nevada written out.com, GradyForNevada.com, and you'll learn a lot more about me than what you've heard today. And I would ask that if you like what you see, I'm a grassroots candidate. I would just heartfelt ask you to donate to my campaign. I'm not picked by the Washington establishment. I'm not wealthy. My parents were poor, but one great thing is my sister and I were never poor. When we were born, my parents were lower middle class, but they were doing well. But we never were poor like they were poor because they worked hard. Yeah. And that's the American way, is that we work hard. So if people would go to GradyForNevada.com, they'll learn more about me. Thank you for letting me be able to tell your viewers that.
Yeah, absolutely. There'll be links also on Rumble, YouTube, on our site to go ahead and reach that same exact website through us here. And just know, I know the campaign trail is long. You've taken time out of your day to speak with us out here in Pahrump. And our listeners, and you're always welcome back on the show as the campaign trail goes on. Give us updates of how things are going. other dates or any event announcements, feel free to reach out. We'll be glad to plug you on the show and let our listeners and viewers know about it. So I want to thank you personally for coming down. Thank your staff also for being patient with some of the technical difficulties we had earlier in the day here. We got through it together,
right,
and it's really appreciated. Appreciate your patience. And so on behalf of Pahrump, on behalf of the Nevada Patriot Podcast, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Grady, and we hope to see you again, and God bless you.
Thank you, Matt, for having me on, and aim high, Nevada.
Thank you for listening. Tell a friend and join us next time. After you catch your breath, check out the NevadaPatriot.com for more content, advertising opportunities, and to give listener feedback. That website again is the NevadaPatriot.com. Until next time, Patriots, stay American.